Today's recipe are for my favorite yummy pecan caramel rolls. These are pretty easy. You just start by activating your yeast. So you'll need a half a cup of water that's warmed to about 105 to 110 degrees. I always check my temperature with a thermometer before I get started. And then 1/4 ounce package of active dry yeast. I always prefer active dry yeast to the instant. It just seems to work better for me, but you could certainly use instant as well. You just don't need to go through this step of activating it if you do that. Here's just a quick time lapse to show you what happens when you activate your yeast. So you'll notice it starts bubbling, it gets foamy. I'm kind of jumping ahead here. You can see it's growing in size and it's filling up that cup. That's what you want to see to make sure that your yeast is active. Then we need to scald our milk. Scalding milk is part of the process for making baked goods, and what it means is to warm it basically to steaming, not bubbling and boiling. Very important, you don't want to boil your milk or you could potentially break it into the proteins. So just warm it until it's steaming. Then I've taken it off the stove here, and I'm going to add in about 1/4 cup of white sugar and 1/4 cup of unsalted butter, and I've cut it up into some pieces here. This will make it just easier to melt. Then give that a stir and let it all melt in together. I'm going to let it sit for just a minute or two. And then come back and stir it a little bit more. Now it's pretty much all the way melted. Now I'm ready to start making my dough. So I'm going to get a big bowl out and start by emptying the contents of this milk and butter mixture and sugar into the bowl. Then we need to add our eggs, and these eggs are at room temperature. So adding those in and then stirring them in. And I found the stirring them was just not breaking up those whites well enough, so I grabbed a fork and just used that to give it a quick whisk to break up those yolks. And now you're going to see me touching it with my finger here. I'm checking it for temperature because you don't want it to be hotter than that 110 degrees, or you could kill the yeast that you just spent all that time activating and your dough won't rise. So once you mix that yeast in, we're going to start with 1½ cups of bread flour. You could use all-purpose, but I find bread flour makes a much fluffier and lets the rolls rise a lot better too. So I'm starting with just 1½ cups here, stirring it and trying to press out some of the lumps. Don't worry if there are some, we're going to be kneading it and it will go away anyway. Then I'm going to add 1 more cup. So now we're at 2½ cups. Stir that in. Once that becomes mostly combined, we're going to add another ½ cup of flour. So now we're at 3 cups. Stirring it in again. And you can see what the consistency is starting to form kind of a mass or a dough. Another ½ cup, we're at 3½ cups now. And it's getting hard to stir. So usually after about this point, I'm going to switch over from my wooden spoon to using my hand. And then adding in just the very last ½ cup here. Now I like to have one hand that works the dough, that's my left hand, and I call that my wet hand. And then there's my right hand, I call that my dry hand. The reason you do this is because when you're kneading, your hand will sometimes get little pieces of dough on it. That makes it sticky and makes the dough mass stick to your hand. However, if you think it's too sticky, you might want to add more flour, which is normally how you would work the dough. But if you touch it with your dry hand and it's not sticky, then you know the dough is of good consistency and you shouldn't add more flour because that will make it too dense. So you'll see here it's really sticking to my hand. And so I'm going to take a break here and I'm going to go quick wash my hands and just start clean. Now I've got my left hand again, that's going to be my wet hand, and my right hand is going to be my dry hand. So I'm working it with my left hand. It's starting to stick a little bit, so I'm adding just a little bit of flour with my duster. But then before I add too much more, I'm going to use my dry hand to touch it, and I'm going to see, does it stick to my dry hand? So it's not sticking to my dry hand. That tells me that this dough is good, even though it's sticking a lot to my wet hand. So don't be tempted to add too much flour or you won't have fluffy, delicious rolls. So I'm going to work this for about maybe 5 minutes in total. And then once I feel like it's smoothed out, then I'm going to take that same bowl that I had, mixed it in with the flour. I'm going to coat it with some oil or some cooking spray, spray a little cooking spray on the top as well, and then cover it with a clean kitchen towel and place it somewhere warm to rise. It's going to need to rise for about an hour or until it doubles in size. And that will depend on the temperature of your kitchen. Meanwhile, I'm going to get ready the filling, which is just a simple combination of about 3/4 cup of brown sugar. And I'm just eyeballing it here. I don't tend to measure. That's sort of how I like to cook. And then the only other ingredient is going to be cinnamon. So we're going to add about 1 tablespoon of cinnamon. You could, of course, add more or less depending on what you like. And then just stirring that together to distribute the cinnamon throughout the sugar and using this little spoon to just break up some of those bigger clumps. We also need to get our caramel ready. Is it caramel or caramel? I don't know. I always say caramel, I guess. Let me know in the comments how you say it. Over the stove on medium-high heat, we're just going to melt 3/4 cup of unsalted butter. And then we're going to add in 3/4 cup of brown sugar. So a 1-to-1 ratio. And right when you first stir it in, you're going to notice it separates completely. The butter floats to the top, the sugar's on the bottom. You let it heat for just a minute, stir it, stop, let it heat for just a minute, stir it. And this maybe takes 3 to 5 minutes total. Very important, you do not want to boil this. If you boil it, you will potentially create a candy, and then that will be more like crunchy and crispy and crystallized than like a caramel or caramel that you would like. So here I'm just doing it on the stove about 3 to 5 minutes. It's not really bubbling, it's just warmed. And then we're ready to put it in the bottom of our pan for our topping. So here I've greased a 9x13 pan, and I'm going to empty the contents of that mixture into the bottom of the pan. Now, if you just wanted caramel rolls, you could just stop right here. But I love pecan caramel rolls. They're so good. So I am going to add pecans to mine. And I'm adding, I would say, a little, maybe around a cup, maybe a little bit more. Just this is what I had left, and we're using it up. So just sprinkle it evenly over the bottom. You're going to be placing your rolls on top of this, and then you'll see we'll flip the rolls so that the caramel is on the top and can drip down and in between the rolls. And now that can just sit until we're ready. So it's been our hour. I'm taking the dough out. And here's the fun commentary. If you ever wonder why I always do voiceovers, here's why.
Is it not sticky?
It's a little sticky.
Why you put salt on there?
That's flour.
What's flour?
Oh, it's something you used to bake with.
Mom, now you can do it. Mom, what are you doing? What are you doing, Mom?
What am I doing?
Yeah. Yeah, Mom.
I'm going to make it into...
What? Oh, like a birthday? Like a birthday?
No,
What are you doing?
I'm going to make it into
A supper?
a square or a rectangle.
A rectangle?
Yep.
I like rectangles. I like rectangles. I like those, Mom.
I
like
always
those.
have some commentary in the background. That's my daughter, Sammy, or Samantha. She is just about 3 now, and she loves to be in the kitchen when I'm cooking. So here all we're doing, if you didn't catch what she was asking me, is we're taking the dough and rolling it out about 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch thick. We're trying to make a rectangle that's about 15 inches long or so. And then we need to put butter on this. And I was naughty and forgot to leave my butter out to soften, so I was kind of using the microwave to soften it throughout this process. So you'll notice some chunks are kind of not so spreadable, but you just need about a 1/4 cup of softened butter. This should be unsalted as well, and spread it evenly across. Then take your brown sugar and cinnamon mixture and sprinkle it evenly over the top. And you want to make sure you get to all the edges so that each piece is a viable roll. Don't skip the outsides like a pizza. You'll be tempted, but then those won't have any filling on them. So spread it out evenly. If you wanted to put more pecans in here, you could. I just chose to put them on the topping. Then this is where you form the rolls. So you're going to pull and tuck to make a roll, and you want it to be as tight as possible. And roll it all the way down. Make sure your ends are tight as well, because those will get loose if you don't focus on them. And then I like to just kind of give them a good tap on the ends to shorten and fatten it up. Trim off the outside ends, and then I'm cutting in half and then half again to make 4 pieces. And then each one of these I'll cut into 3. That makes 1 dozen or 12. So I usually make this recipe into 12. Once these are all cut, all we need to do is put them on our caramel topping. So I'm just going to snug them in here together in rows of 4. And then I don't like to leave those last 2 little bits off that I cut off on the ends. We'll just stick those in. Those are good for the kids and everything. So you've got 12 plus 2 little end pieces. Then cover it with that clean towel again and set it aside for about half an hour or so in a warm spot until it rises up like this. And you'll bake at 375 degrees for about 25 minutes. And then you want to allow them to cool for about 5 minutes. And that's so that that bottom is going to start to solidify a little bit and not be so liquidy. And then I just take a cookie sheet, put it on top, and flip it over. This is what I'm going to store my rolls on. And then I can either put a dome or put some wrap over the top. All you have to really do then is pull the baking sheet off, and there's your rolls. These are soft, warm, gooey, full of pecans, and I just think super easy. I was never a good bread maker or roll maker. This recipe is too easy. I cannot wait to try one of these. I hope you give this one a try too, and you love it as much as we do. Take care now. Bye.